Well, indeed, good afternoon. Welcome. You are on KTN Business Today. My name is Peter Akaba. On this day, Thursday, the 30th day of March, the year 2017. Again, I bid you welcome. Over the next 1 hour, as usual, we will endeavor to unpack for you, business headlines from this region, from within Kenya, and indeed from right across the world. Today is budget day for the year 2017. This budget is being read up to 2 months early, with the reason being, of course, the election that is looming later on in the year. This, of course, has thrown into a tailspin the usual exercise of reading the budget in tandem across the three East Africa countries, and of course Rwanda and maybe Burundi, who sometimes read the budgets in September because they are a franc-denominated country. But of course the question is, what effect will this have on this economy and across the region? To unpack that and much more surrounding the budget, I have with me a studio panel that will seek to inform you on just these aspects of the budget. And with me in studio today, I have Rajesha. He is a senior tax partner at PwC. He is a man of great experience in the arena of taxation, budgeting, finance. Also with me in studio today, I have Lydia Dirango. She is an expert in transfer pricing. She is a senior manager at Ernst & Young, of course, bringing many years of experience into this conversation. And also in studio is Edward Nabangi. He is an auditor of many years standing. He works for the firm Nabangi and we are associates, and indeed will bring a devolution aspect to this because he is an expert in terms of audit, especially at the devolution perspective. Well, we also have with us in studio my colleague Ashley Mazuri, who is here in studio to unpack some of the numbers around the budget for us and be able to just crystallize what these numbers are this year. Of course, the fact that the budget has been a process. It used to be an event, but several years ago that has changed. So just what are these numbers? What are the different allocations this year? What were the allocations last year? What were the changes? What can we look forward to? And what are the timelines? Those are the things that she is here to tackle. So Ashley, well, over to you. Take it away.
How are you, Akaba, first of all?
I'm fine,
Let me ask you this. You're a Kenyan. What would you expect from the budget?
Well, for me, mostly the important thing around this budget is the fact that government has vowed not to increase any taxation.
Yes.
So most of us consumers were expecting a little more pain this year. People who consume things like cigarettes, alcohol, some women, of course, a lot of men do sometimes fork out a lot of cash towards some of these things that did get hit last year. So what is the perspective on those consumer products this year?
Yeah.
That is one of the things I'm waiting to really see.
Okay, all the best with that. But first, let's take a look at the budget outlook.
Yes.
In the financial year 2014-2015, Kenya was allocated 1.7 trillion shillings.
Yes.
In the financial year 2015-2016, we got 2.1 trillion shillings. Of course, there we are seeing around a 400 billion shillings increase. In the budget year 2016-2017, we got 2.3 trillion shillings.
Yes.
That is around 0.2 trillion shillings. And then finally, this year, we expect 2.6 trillion shillings. Well, that's around 3 trillion shillings, 0.3 trillion shillings more. Of course, there's also the issue of the deficit. We have
just before you go on, just to, of course, bring us, our readers, our viewers up to speed, the fact that a few months ago, this conversation would have been slightly different. The figure would have been 2.28 trillion shillings for the budget, but now we're at 2.6 trillion shillings because, as we said, budgeting is a process, and indeed some priorities did get brought into the budget. That's pushing it up by quite a few shillings, Ashley.
Okay, but with the issue of the deficit, what do you think is in terms of being good for the country? Of course, we need to borrow more, we need to get more well-wishers. Then what happens to the country?
I had a conversation about that with one of our tax analysts who's here in studio, and indeed, while many Kenyans think that in absolute terms, this deficit is indeed growing. In the ratio of, this deficit to GDP in, statistically, it's still a constant that is still below 50%, and not really something that many Kenyans should be concerned about. That, of course, is his perspective. Other people would beg to differ, but that is part of what we will unpack getting into the discussion later on.
Okay, let's move on to the budget 2016-2017 highlights. Of course, we'll start looking at the gains. The energy sector got 120.2 billion shillings. Of course, this was to fast track development projects such as the geothermal development project, the power transmission project, the rural electrification program, of course, the last mile connectivity program, which just the other day got 6.6 billion for the upgrade. And then the agriculture sector got 4.9 billion shillings to subsidize fertilizer and 1.6 billion to food reserves. Of course, with the current situation, drought and everything, we need this kind of allocation. Maternal health care got 4.3 billion shillings. We seem to be having a problem with this, but this was mainly to support free maternal health care.
I want to take you slightly back, sorry to interrupt you right there, to the fact that we talked about the gains that have been made around things like energy. And this being capital intensive projects that require a lot of money up front. We have been told here in studio today that we should expect that the high voltage line between Mombasa and Nairobi, which is 400 kilovolt amperes, that is really high, should come on stream in the next 2 months, and that Kenyans can then start to enjoy the benefits of a much more efficient transmission system, and that we will see up to a 4 shilling gain in terms of cash that is off your bill directly. Ashley.
But if I may ask you, they've been telling us, for example, the last mile connectivity program was supposed to be done by April, and yet no updates so far. So do you think these 2 months will really be 2 months?
Well, it's not a perfect world. I know they're doing their best, but the thing about government is that there's lots of boxes to tick along the way. For example, building that line from Mombasa meant the relocation of different communities and their compensation in many different ways. This is supposed to be a simple exercise. But with the chaos around Kenya's land records, and then of course the political perspective, we've had instances where work completely had to stop because people were invading those pieces even after they had been paid to leave the same pieces of land. So this conversation, of course, being something that we continue to keep monitoring to see whether this will be delivered on time or not. Ashley.
Okay. So let's move on. We were at maternal health care, which was allocated 4.3 billion shillings. Of course, this was to support the maternal health care project that was introduced by the government in 2013. Of course, Mumias Sugar Company was allocated 2 billion shillings. We all know that Mumias has been struggling for the last couple of years or months. So this project was supposed to...
So quick question about Mumias. Do you think we're throwing good money after bad?
Well, that's a tricky question. Yes, and maybe not yes. It depends with how someone views it.
Yes. But anyway, Mumias is a listed company, and we know because we've done a few of those stories on the ground that there has been a consistent effort to turn that company around so far. Okay.
Let's move on to the tourism sector, which was allocated 4.5 billion shillings last year. Of course, tourism went through a lot in terms of low tourist numbers because of insecurity issues. So the 4.5 billion shillings was supposed to promote tourism activities. If we can move on to the losses, just a few, the informal sector taxation. Now, for the longest time, the informal sector has been exempted from taxation. Now, also, of course, from last year, they were included in taxation. Then there's the introduction of excise duty on kerosene. We are all aware that in 2011, the government reduced the taxes on this particular sector, but they reintroduced the excise duty because of the increased adulteration of fuel in the country. We can quickly go to the budget 2017-2018. Oh, sorry. The loss hike on cosmetics and beauty product prices.
This is particularly important for you, and you skip it.
Yes, for those who are into makeup. But then funny thing, immediately this particular policy was announced. Retailers in, Du Bois and River Road started increasing their prices immediately. And many beauty, ladies, when you hear such a thing, you'd rush to get a supply of products before it is hiked. So when we got there, of course, you found out that the prices were already hiked.
Well, I'll tell you, because I got a bit of a powdering myself before I came into studio. This is especially important for me also, just to see whether the 10% excise duty that was slapped on this will remain, and indeed to be able to have a conversation on just what that has meant for that sector. Indeed, the conversation is that a lot of this had not in any significant way been contributing towards the economy, and that now they start to pay their way, whether they're SMEs or indeed whether they are corporate companies at the global level, Ashley.
But it's a pretty lucrative industry, yes.
Definitely.
Okay, so now on to the budget 2017-2018. Of course, the budget projected at 2.6 trillion shillings.
Yes.
Of course, we don't expect major tax increase. The manufacturing industry just the other day was requesting for a stable tax system, which will help, of course, with the ease of doing business and growing the economy. We can move on to a healthy growth in revenue, even without tax increase. Of course, that is expected in this budget.
Let's stop right there, because I have two questions to pose here. Looking at the previous figure, 2.6 trillion shillings, in the middle of a drought, right? We have seen lots of listed companies, scores of them,
Yes.
post profit warnings, and indeed post really bad returns compared to other years.
But isn't this because of the interest cap?
Let me finish. We have seen the interest rates cap, which then has meant that lending to the private sector by banks has then slowed down. We have seen that because of the drought and other factors, provisioning for bad debt go up because SMEs and other players are not paying up their debt to the banks, right? And generally, we have a slowing economy because, well, that's what is happening for this part of the world.
Yes.
So how do you then reconcile that with a really optimistic budget at 2.6 trillion shillings?
Now, I think that is one of the questions that we should ask the
Definitely.
CES of Treasury, of course, Henry
And one that
Rotich.
my panel will be tackling later on in the show.
Very able panel. Of course, now we can move on to the 2017-2018 allocation estimates.
Yes.
Now we can see agriculture has been allocated 46.6 billion shillings, mainly to enhance the strategic food reserves, establishment of crop and cattle insurance. The energy infrastructure and ICT has been allocated 509.4 billion shillings for projects such as LAPSED, the standard gauge railway, which is soon going to be, running up and running. And of course, the digital literacy program, which has been ongoing for a few months. We can move on to the general economic and commerce affairs, which has been allocated 19.9 billion shillings. Of course, this is to promote sectors like tourism, to increase earnings in these sectors, and also to reduce non-tariff barriers. The health sector has been allocated 60.9 billion shillings, which is for the rehabilitation of hospitals across the country, and of course for the maternal health care project that has been ongoing. The education system has been allocated 349.9 billion shillings. There it is. Mainly to recruit more training teachers, additional teachers, which is around 5,000. And of course, enhancing technical and vocational education in the country, which is nowadays a big deal. And lastly, national security has been allocated 126.1 billion shillings. Of course, this is just among what we're expecting from the CES Henry Rotich this afternoon, actually in just a few minutes.
Well, indeed, Ashley, quite an insightful conversation there. Indeed, the fact that in just about 40 minutes and 26 seconds,
Yes.
we expect to be able to cross live to Parliament, where indeed the budget statement, the process to table that before Parliament, and indeed before the country should start to roll out the CS for Treasury, there, Henry Rotich, of course, being expected to table that shortly. Well, before we proceed on that, the fact that this budget, of course, is against a background of several different things. One of them, of course, is the fact that there are a lot of manufacturers who feel that Kenya is now an ideal place and has indeed tackled this ease of doing business agenda and want to come into the country. The latest being Iveco, which is the Industrial Vehicles Corporation. And these guys came in earlier on in the year and have said that they are going to set up, well, a factory here not in Nairobi, but in Mombasa, and expect that this will enable them start to crystallize the Kenyan dream of starting to produce vehicles here locally and for the local and regional markets. Well, we now want to proceed with that conversation as earlier promised, and of course, standing by with me here in studio has been the fact that we continue to see a varied reaction across the country due to the fact that the budget is being read here today. And that conversation, of course, being just 39 minutes away now. and some seconds and counting. And with me in studio to, well, crystallize that, as earlier indicated, we have with us Lydia Dirango. She is a senior manager at Ernst & Young. We also have Edward Nabangi. He is an auditor of many years, indeed decades experience. His personal brand of expertise is around devolution and taxation. And of course, we have Rajesha, who is senior partner for tax at PwC. Karibuni sana. Now, just about 38 minutes to go, and of course, this having to be a very fast conversation. I wanted to start off with you, Rajesh, and to simply ask, this budget seems to be rather ambitious. Do you think we will be able to achieve what we have set out to do? Will we be able to raise the kind of revenue that we are targeting right there?
Peter, I think ambitious might be a good word or might be interpreted differently. I think it's a budget which continues with the plans and intentions that you've seen over the last 3-4 years, certainly since the government came into power. Yeah. So there is nothing new as such in the budget itself. It's about completion of the projects they've intended to, so when you talk about ambition, I think we need to remember one thing. If you look at the current budget, or to say 10 years ago, we were actually sometimes borrowing money to finance our recurrent expenditure. At least now, we as a country, we are actually borrowing to finance development expenditure. So if the spend is not going to be there, it's unlikely the government will be borrowing, either from the local market or through the international markets, or even getting support from our international funding partners. Yeah. So, and we have seen that, although last year we said it was going to be 2.3 trillion shillings. I was saying dollars. We're not in the country yet. We will have those numbers yet. And so I think we'll have to see. Ambitious, yes, but it is ambition that we must complete things we have started. Yes.
Definitely. Indeed, coming to you, Edward, the fact that, and indeed, welcome to studio, that this budget is ambitious also because it endeavors to continue the conversation around devolution, moving money from the centers to the counties. Do you think we have been able to live up to that promise in subsequent budgets to date?
No, I think as far as moving money is concerned, we can say the budget is ambitious. Mm-hmm. However, we are trying to encourage the county governments to monitor the budget by forming relevant budget committees, which have not been there in most of the counties. Mm-hmm. So as long as the budget committees are formed, the budget is really monitored, the spending is monitored in the counties, then we shall achieve what we want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've had the concerns around fast absorption. Secondly, lack of capacity, first to absorb and then to police this sort of consumption of the funds that have been set aside at the county level. Do you think putting in place these committees will then start to enable us roll out those measures?
The budget committees will be monitoring how the money allocated is spent, and then they make periodic reports to the executive at the counties, like the variances. They are supposed to spend this, but they have maybe overspent when the year is not over. So we encourage the formation of budget committees at the county level so that the budget actually are monitored.
Would these include funds that have been generated by counties by themselves, from things like parking fees, levies, and that sort of thing, not just the allocation?
No, you see, a budget also takes into account the locally generated revenue. So it is all to be monitored because it's also public funds.
And Lydia, just to bring you in, this is the local conversation around funds that sometimes have to be generated even internationally. And you're an expert when it comes to transfer pricing, trade misinvoicing, that sort of thing. For a lot of counties, the fact of the matter has been that they play host to multinationals, which are considered national assets. Case in point, I think Kwale with base titanium, we have Turkana with the oil. How do you then reconcile the conversation that he's talking about, where you need to build capacities to police these players locally, while still being able to play at a global stage in terms of ability and professionalism?
Okay, thanks for that question. And I think two things have to be separated, where we have to look at what taxes the national government can collect and then what the counties can collect. Because when it comes to corporation tax, that one will definitely go first to the national government.
Yes.
But when it comes to if there's any levy to be paid,
Or
then
cess.
it will, yes, or cess, it will have to go to the county. So what I think needs to be done is there has to be proper cooperation between the counties and the national government, so that even the reports that the multinational are reporting to the national government, the county has to be able to confirm that exactly this is what we've done, whereby now they can say we have invested this much, and the person in county can actually check for them and not the person in national government to be sent there, so that to save costs. Because what you'll find is that there's a lot of duplication now that the different counties are being set up. There's a lot of duplication at the national level and at the county level. So this needs to be addressed, and what you'll find is that when there's proper duty allocation and the duplication is reduced, it will save on cost.
Edward, do you think we're doing enough to be able to do what she's saying, that empower the counties while ensuring that these roles are not duplicated at national government by people who are sitting far away in Nairobi?
No, that's true, Peter. What do we do? For the national government, they are supposed to insist on reports of variances on performance or budget monitoring.
Yes.
So we build the capacity at the county level, and then the national government is not to get reports on agreed templates, like quarterly or monthly, showing how the budgets have been spent or how the money has been spent, whether it's within or without a budget.
Rajesh, PwC is one of the larger, in fact, we say one of the big four in this country. And the Auditor General's Office has time and again said that it does not have the requisite capacity to be able to police some of the things that we are talking about here. Do you think there is room for them to start to, so to say, to give this work to other people at national, at county, and even at other levels? Because this office is actually stretched. Yet we have counties which are supposed to table these reports once in a while, and some of them are 3 years back in terms of audit.
Interesting, Peter. Yeah, I think that sort of support is been provided to the Auditor General, obviously, when it comes to auditing of state corporations and everything.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's useful then to think through now, what about at the government level itself? What can we do in terms of capacity building? And I think the government is already looking at some of those aspects. So initially, obviously, it will be through resource support for others doing the work. But at the end of the day, I think the government has to take the steps to build the capacity in themselves. And I can clearly see an agenda building around technical support, where the Office of the Auditor General can be supported with how to build capacity for his office, such that it's not then 3 years, but it's within the time speculated in the Physical Public Finance Management Act, which talks about audits have to be done by a certain point in time. Edward, I don't know what that date is. It says within 6 months you must have your accounts ready and finalized and audited.
Would we be able to then tender these out to private individuals, private companies, private corporations that can take up these roles in one way or another and then play that role under the supervision of the office?
They can, but at the end of the day, capacity has to be built. I mean, I can't see right now, even if I look at the existing capacity within the firms themselves, they will be able to even carry out meet those deadlines which are there. So as a country, we have to definitely focus on capacity building. And if I look at the institute which I'm a member of, it's something we're consciously working towards, helping build capacity and skills around public finance.
And Edward, let me come back to you before going to Lydia. The fact of the matter is that we've seen a lot of revenue leakage. It's one of the reasons that we don't often generate as much revenue as we would like. And secondly, the fact that even after it's generated, a lot of it goes away in terms of corruption, which we see reported all over the place. What are the measures that can be put in place to tighten some of these loopholes?
One of the ways is to have timely audit.
Yes.
Yeah. Let us not wait after 3-4 years, as my colleague has said, is when now you have an audit. No. Let's introduce timely audit, if possible, what is called interim audit. Before the end of financial year, the Controller Auditor General has already perused the books. That will act as a moral restraint on the officers running the ministries or in charge of finance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lydia, coming to you, Chapter 6 of the Constitution had originally set out a whole raft of measures to ensure that individuals in government and other stakeholders literally are on the straight and narrow when it comes to public funds. This has been frittered away in many various ways. What are the ways that we can then begin to say that we are retracing our steps to get to what was originally intended? Because as we talk about 2.6 trillion shillings, there are many Kenyans asking themselves just how much of this will actually get used for what it was intended.
I think it goes back to the issue of proper governance and then also the timely audit that has been discussed. And when looking at it critically, you have to look at when somebody has been given allocated funds for be it development, there has to be proper review, even if it means on a quarterly basis, tracing back our steps and seeing what have we achieved in terms of the money that has been first disbursed to you, and then thereafter, and then you can get the second batch of investment. And what you'll see is that the government is really trying in terms of fighting corruption. And even when you look at in this budget, there's been a proper allocation whereby there's allocation to the anti-ethics corruption, and then also to the DBP to the tune of around 5 billion, so that to actually go back and let's try and correct the past mistakes and also look at ways of how better can we move forward.
Okay. Indeed, insightful conversation there. The fact that corruption continues to be a thorn in the flesh of many Kenyans, and that the governance conversation does need to be heightened to tackle that. Well, let's just hold the thoughts here for a minute, especially because my colleague Abi Agena has been standing by at Parliament. Of course, the time now being some 26 minutes and 32 seconds to go till 3 o'clock, when we expect the CS for the National Treasury, Henry Rotich, to be able to table the budget statement and tell Kenyans what to expect over the next 1 year. Abi, indeed, I know it's been a busy morning for you and getting much busier now that it's approaching 3 o'clock. What is the sentiment on the ground at Parliament?
Well, many thanks, Wakab. The mood here at Parliament is many people are quite expectant, especially the members of Parliament, as the Jubilee administration tables its last budget in office. And of course, many were hoping to see what taxation measures will the government be targeting towards raising revenue. We're talking about 1.7 trillion shillings that is expected to be collected by the tax authority, that is the Kenya Revenue Authority. Over and above that, a number of the legislators here will be keen on seeing what other aspects will the government be prioritizing investments moving forward. And let me bring in the Member of Parliament for Suba and also the chairman of, chairman for ODM, as well as the member of the Budget Committee, that is John Mbadi. Many thanks, Mheshimiwa. We are in a transition budget of sorts where a government in power is heading towards an election. What will be the spending priorities as we head to the polls?
I think what we need to understand is that already we know where the government is allocating the resource envelope. The budget estimates had been presented to Parliament. No much differences with the previous budgets in terms of priorities. I still see the Jubilee administration, apart from factoring in about 100 billion shillings extra for the public service sector wages, I see more money being allocated to the same projects, that is infrastructure, is taking a huge chunk of our budget, and money going to the same usual ministries like agriculture and water. So there is nothing really much in terms of priorities spending for this budget. And there is also the issue of putting a little bit more resources to IBC, but it should be understood that this budget is really going to take effect from 1st of July. So for the remaining part of the Jubilee government's tenure, it is a budget that is really not going to be felt. It's not going to be spent by this government, so to speak, because really for ministries to prepare even their work plans and to be able to absorb this budget will be way past August 8th of this year. So this is a budget that really is not capturing the mood of what Jubilee wants to tell the country. But what I think they are going to try to do this afternoon in terms of revenue raising measures, I expect or suspect that there will be a lot of PR pronouncements regarding what may look as sugary and flowery proposals to make life easy for Kenyans. But as to whether that would really be actualized is debatable, because I want to hear deliberate efforts to ensure that the cost of living is lowered, because that is a major concern that we have today. How are we going to spur more investment so that we create more job opportunities? And I think the CS will try, because this is being an election year and the last budget, will try to really try to quote Kenyans by making pronouncements that may sound juicy, but in real sense may not be implementable.
Interesting. And perhaps looking at this budget as well, Mbadi, analysts have come out saying we are going to see a sort of election spending budget where the government will look at projects that are more than halfway complete and channel more resources towards that so that they are able to fast track these projects. Do you feel this is what is going to happen?
Yeah, that's what actually they have tried to do. If you look at their allocations in the infrastructure, they have put quite a bit. But I think they're late in what they are doing at the moment, because really this budget, the Jubilee administration will not be able to use it for campaigns in whichever way. What they should have done was to allocate those resources in the previous years so that the projects by now would be running and ongoing. But what we are seeing is, I think, because we have challenged them previously, that you are trying to start projects telling people tunazindua hii na tunazindua hii. Can you tell us where the money is in the budget? So I think they have tried to push a little bit more resources to that, so that when they move around in the remaining months, they will be telling people it's already in the budget of 2017-2018, which budget really is not their budget. The budget of 2017-2018 is the budget of the government that will be in power after August 8th, and I expect that that should be our budget as NASA.
All right. And yes. Mbadi, moving forward right now, of course, we've seen a lot of Kenyans wanting to see a trickle-down effect, a mwananchi budget that is centered really on the common man who is currently facing inflation of 9.04%.
Yes.
The people also experiencing high food prices. The rents have hit the roof.
Yes.
Perhaps, what do you think the CS should really use as a magic wand in this budget speech?
You see, if you ask me, that should have happened in the budget allocations, in the estimates. We should have seen more resources put in the agriculture sector to ensure that we have better provision of food to Kenyans in the coming years. But for the moment, because we have been hit seriously hard by the cost of living, the government should come up with ways of cushioning the less privileged members of our society, because it has become a crisis. Kenyans are suffering, especially those of us, those Kenyans who are not able to manage an income of more than maybe $2 a day. So the people, the less privileged Kenyans, I expect the CS to talk about how are we cushioning, given that the weather pattern is not favorable. You look at the rain patterns is not favorable, and yet already we are facing starvation. We have issues of drought and the cattle. So we expect this budget. We need to be told how then those Kenyans who are pastoralists, how they are going to be helped to come out of this mess that they are already finding themselves in. But in a nutshell, to help address or mitigate the current cost of living that has hit the roof is to cushion the less privileged. What systems are there? And two, how then do we mitigate this apparent possibility of lack of food even going forward? Because that, to me, food is everything. Yeah, without a provision of food, then the society would really affected.
Right. And finally, Mbadi, now that we are going into the elections. We know that part of the budget for 2016-2017 was heavily towards ensuring IEBC is properly resourced. Yes. And of course, the judiciary also was one of the big winners in the last election, in the last budget, really. Do you feel the elections and the electoral process will be getting a lion's share this time around?
No, I don't expect much to be allocated now to IEBC, because really IEBC for their August 8 election, the resources should have been provided in 2016-2017 financially. And again, during the supplementary budget, we saw more resources being pushed to IEBC, because this budget, as I said, will take effect from 1st July. All right. You don't expect IEBC to wait until 1st July to start accessing funds to prepare for our elections. Maybe just putting a little more resources to deal with the after election events that would involve IEBC, maybe electoral disputes and cases, money to be payable to the lawyers, and possibly if there is a possibility of a runoff, then how do we resource it? That, I think, can be captured in this budget. But above all, there is the issue of preparing, if there is a runoff, that preparation, the time between the election and the time of the runoff, you need again to prepare. It's like you are preparing for another election. Right. So there should be some allocation to cater for possibility of a runoff.
And Mbadi, lastly, the elephant in the room around the budget has been, of course, the high public wage bill, standing at about 627 billion shillings. Do you feel we need to take on austerity measures as the president proposed in the State of the Nation address?
The figure of 600 billion is still disputable. Actually, as a position, we have come out to say that that figure a lot of times is exaggerated. We know the actual wage bill, but that's not to say that the wage bill is not a concern. It is a concern. Austerity measures has been talked about, but I think in this country what we face as the serious challenge, the most serious challenge, is corruption. If we fix corruption, I don't think we should even belabor much on the wage bill. We would be able to pay our public servants decent salary. I think we are still not paying our public servants the salary that they should be paid. But as I conclude, another mistake with our public service is duplication of duties. I think we need to rationalize. There's duplication. If you come to the headquarters here, a ministry like Agriculture, which is almost 100% devolved, still has the same number of staff that we had before the advent of the new constitution. And I think it is irrational, it is irresponsible, and it is clear wastage.
Many thanks there, John Mbadi, speaking to us, a member of the Budget Committee, as well as a member of Parliament for Suba constituency, just sharing his insights on the budget and what to expect. And he is quite particular, indicating that he'd like to see that this year's budget to be more Mwananchi focused, and it should be able to tackle issues around the high cost of commodities in the market. And of course, also pointing to the fact that corruption needs to be fixed, and if the government is to ensure that the economy grows at the projected rate of 6%, we need to put a lead really on corruption. And of course, we are coming to you live from Parliament here in Nairobi, and we can see now a huge number of various leaders coming in. That is the CS for the Interior, actually, and Kaiseri making his way into Parliament. We also have there a member of the Budget Committee, and that is Oburu Oginga, just strolling in as we prepare for the budget reading, expected from about, it was actually expected to start at 2 p.m. It's stretched a bit, and it is 2:43 p.m. and waiting to hear and listen more from the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury. Of course, this is the last budget statement that will be coming from the Jubilee administration in their first term in office, and many saying it's more of a transitionary budget where they'll be keen to ensure there's continuity when they clinch power come the elections, and if they don't the next administration will have to tinker around with the budget, the supplementary budget, really, if this comes to pass. So we continue to give you our special coverage here from the National Assembly, and quite an expectant members here in the House, Wakaba, and of course we'll be speaking to more and more of the legislators, the senators, the members of parliament, just to pick their minds on what they feel about the budget and what would they like to see addressed moving forward. So for now, Wakaba, that's what we have established. We are yet to see the CS Henry Rotich. He's yet to make his way here, but we've seen a number of Treasury officials already here. We've seen the cabinet secretaries coming in, such as for infrastructure, James Masharia. We've also seen Sports CS Hassan Wario, among other principal secretaries. So perhaps an indication that we might be starting anytime from now, and we'll be keeping you posted from this end, Wakaba.
Well, indeed, Abi, thank you very much for that update right there. It is indeed 13 minutes to the top of the hour and some seconds, about 20 seconds to 3 o'clock, when we do expect that Treasury doors will open and the march for the Cabinet Secretary towards, of course, Parliament will start, and the process, of course, of tabling and reading the budget statement for the year 2017-2018 can, of course, officially start off. Raising quite pertinent questions there in that conversation there with the chairman of ODM, John Mbadi. And of course, the perspective has been that there has been a lot of conversation around the wage bill, some saying that this is overly bloated, something that we do need a bit of rationalization. Well, depending on who you ask again. Coming back to the discussion around the budget, and of course, my panel still here in studio with me. And the question we want to delve into now is, at 2.6 trillion shillings and with a deficit of about depending on who you ask, about 1 billion shillings, 900 billion shillings, where exactly is this money going to come from? How are we going to raise the revenue that is collected locally from the 842 billion that was raised last year to the over 1 trillion that is expected to be raised this year? What kind of magic will it take? That's the question we want to put to the panel right now. So Rajesh, what do you think they will have to do to make up these amounts that we have seen on this budget?
Yeah, so Peter, thanks. That's a very good question. Because at the end of the day, we as a country finance our expenditure from tax revenues primarily. That's our main source of revenues for the government. And if you look at it, they're planning an ambitious growth in that revenue compared to last year, or the June year, and which will come soon. The question is, if the government is saying that we want to give predictability around and certainty around tax, that means it's unlikely we'll see changes in tax rates, whether it's in income tax or VAT or excise. Excise is in a way taken care of because there's an inflationary adjustment is already built in into the excise system. So I can't see them increasing the principal taxes themselves. So it's going to really, again, down to the Kenya Revenue Authority, been a bit more focused on what I call attracting potential taxpayers. You know, there are likely people out there who are not simply paying taxes. So one of the focuses has to be around expanding the tax net to bring more businesses and people to be accountable for taxes, whether it's income tax or whether it's consumption taxes like VAT. So I can say clearly, I think the CS putting that expectation and demand on the KRA to actually keep on minimizing those what I could call revenue leakages, whether it's at the custom points or whether it's at the trade points. I can clearly see continuous demand on the Revenue Authority to make sure that they minimize revenue leakages. Having said that, I can also see that he could perhaps pick up the topic of the day, which is around gambling, and start putting maybe excise on gambling. Because at the end of the day, that's a discretionary spend. And I can see that could be an opportunity could pick up, particularly in a year when we're going to elections.
And one that hasn't been tapped because it didn't exist before.
So I can clearly see him, he might just do that, putting excise on gambling, which could be another new source of revenue. It's unlikely to create too many ripples in the marketplace. So that is something I can see. But it has he's got very little maneuver in terms of raising tax rates. So it has to come from increasing the volume, as you say. So getting more people into the net. But there is this one opportunity I can see him having, excise on gambling.
Indeed, wonderful insights there, Rajesh. The fact that the gambling industry has burgeoned here in Africa, here in Kenya especially. Indeed, we're even playing at a global level now with sponsorships as far abroad as Britain on the Premier League and that sort of thing. So this indeed being an opportunity where they just might decide to tap, will of course look out for that. Now, Edward, it is an election year, and this increase in revenue has to be found in a way that will ensure the government still remains popular. Where do you think they can find this money without becoming really unpopular this election year?
As administrated, they are not going to increase, or the CS has not increased the tax rates.
Yes.
But I think they can modernize the tax by modernization of the tax collection, so that will bring in more revenue. And as my colleague has stated, they can also improve on the tax base, so that they bring in more people in the tax bracket. Where they can modernize the taxes, like the payee, they should bring in more people in the bracket, so that they collect more revenue. And excise duty, especially excise duty in cooperatives. I think it is not being implemented properly. So the CS must modernize it. Look at what has happened since it was enacted. Let it be modernized. Generally, they should raise revenue without increasing the tax.
Taxation. Lydia, let me come to you, especially the fact that majority of the Kenyan population lives outside of Nairobi and major urban centers. There are thousands, indeed millions of little businesses out there that may not be paying their way. As the gentlemen here have indicated, there lies new opportunities for tapping this for taxation. But then the issue of technology, the fact that we have started to see the rollout of things like Huduma centers at posters countrywide. We have mobile phones now, and we have various ways of starting to reach these people. Do you think KRA has been, and indeed government, has been innovative enough to start talking to these businesses? Indeed, think even of the millennial conversation.
It's interesting to see that the time the KRA rolled out the iTax, there was a question of when you're supposed to actually file your return online. And the question was, people in the mashinani, how are they going to access internet, first of all, and how many people have smartphones or even a laptop so that they can actually file their return online? And what you'll see is that what happened is that the many cyber cafes actually mushroomed in the village, because that's the only place you could go and tell them, please help me file a return, or even initially help me get a PIN. So that now they can actually try and comply. And you'll see that in the mashinani, not many people have actually embraced it, because if it is the usual small business, you rarely need a PIN to do your small business. And what they actually have to do is continue with the whole integration that for you to actually get a permit, maybe, you have to show your PIN. So that now it forces you to go and actually register your business compliant. And then become compliant, get a PIN so that you can be able to pay your permit. Because you'll find that maybe the counties are not integrated with the KRA system, so that now it becomes a requirement so that actually the government can be able to tap into the informal sector.
Rajesh, do you think government has been innovative enough in terms of enabling compliance at this level? When you start to think about the conversation around millennials, new businesses that have mushroomed all over things like Facebook, some of them doing really, really well. Do you think these are being tapped for taxation?
I think it's a challenge, really, not only for us as a country, but globally. When we look at technology, in fact, I was talking to Lydia earlier there. My background initially was technology myself before I became a tax practitioner. So one of the challenges globally is, what is the source of that income? So that is something I think when I expect to see the new income tax coming out is one of the challenges I can see in a policy sense the government dealing with. How do we tax income or even consumption in a information technology enabled business environment? And that's certainly I can see that coming. So that's not going to have an impact certainly in this year, but certainly it will start having an impact as we go and come out with the new Income Tax Act, because it is certainly a challenge. How do you tax? It's not only about e-commerce, but actually doing business, which is technology enabled. And it's a big It's not small. Yeah. And it will boil down to two simple facets in my view.
Yes.
How do you make it easy for people to pay tax?
Yes.
And if you continue with some of the ways returns have to be filed, everything, then that will become a challenge. Yeah. So one of the principles has to be ease of paying taxes has to come through clearly, particularly for information technology enabled businesses.
Yes.
That's key because the volumes of transactions will not be small. Yeah. So you have to come out with easy ways of determining what is to be taxed and how to get people to make it easy for them to pay tax.
Okay.
And that is something I clearly see when the new income tax comes out. It's something I hope the government will address.
Indeed, insightful conversation right there, Rajesh. Also to remind our viewers that we are still, of course, following up what is happening out there, both at Parliament and at Treasury buildings. We're, of course, waiting to see those doors right there on your screen open. And the man with the briefcase stepping out with the flowers in his lapel, and of course starting the walk towards Parliament with the briefcase that of course holds the speech that we are all waiting to hear. That of course something we are waiting to bring you live pictures over the next few minutes as the countdown continues. Indeed, 3 minutes, 15 seconds to the top of the hour, and that process is expected to begin just then. Will they be on time? Well, just keep it KTN News and see for yourself. Well, back to our conversation. And Edward, the interesting bit here for this country is the fact that a lot of people with businesses are now the youth. And a lot of the youth get to hear that all the things about corruption, this amount of money has disappeared, this has been used in the wrong way. It does not inspire people to become tax compliant. What do you think the conversation has to be then going forward to make the youth start to appreciate the need to pay tax?
I think the conversation must be that you give very heavy penalties for non-compliance of tax. Again, let's modernize the tax amnesty system.
Yes.
The current amnesty system, which only is not actually, it does not induce somebody to come up and declare the tax, because you know when you come up and declare the tax, they only excuse you or you don't pay all the penalties. So let's modernize the tax amnesty system, and again, let's encourage people to be compliant by in fact, when somebody gets a business, is also registered by KRA, and the turnover levels for somebody to start paying, like for example, the turnover tax should come low, like 500,000. The current one is too high. It's only meant for big business, and let's punish the tax offenders heavily, so that the youth is encouraged.
Well, indeed, again, very good insights there coming from you, Edward. The fact that enforcement doesn't seem to be something that is at the heart of the political and indeed other kind of will at the heart of revenue generation within government, and something that might indeed need to be looked at very keenly in the budget that is coming up. We now want to proceed on a short break, but on the other side of that break, the debate, of course, the discussion here continues. And one of the questions we want to tackle after that is the fact that just about a year ago, in the previous budget, of course, not a year, but several months, the government tried to operationalize a move to give an amnesty, indeed tax amnesty, to people with cash and assets abroad. What has been the success to that conversation? What have been the steps that have been taken to operationalize that and then to enable that money start to trickle into this country? Are those some of the funds that we are talking about? That and more after the short break. Do stay with us here on KTN News.
This is KTN News.
Let me take care of your hands.
Kwa sababu ni muhimu kutunza mikono ya mama, Omo ina chembe-chembe asili ya kutunza mikono ya mama anapofua. Omo, nguvu ya kutoa madoa sugu, kutunza mikono.
Eric, babe, I feel like I've added some weight. Do you think this dress is too tight?
Yes.
Yes! Yes, yes! Babe!
Register, bet, and win with Superbet 247, Kenya's newest and biggest gaming site. To join, send accept to 29247 or dial *292# and win big. Terms and conditions apply.
This is KTN News.
Well, indeed, and thank you very much for staying with us here on KTN Business today. My name is Peter Akaba. This special edition, of course, being here to be able to bring you live proceedings of the budget policy statement presentation at Parliament buildings that was expected to run from 3 o'clock. It's not just about 3 o'clock, and of course, we can see that we are keeping African time. And of course, the conversation being that we are waiting for the doors at Treasury to open and enable the man with a lapel, with a flower in his lapel, that of course is the CS to the National Treasury, Henry Rotich, to be able to, well, come out with a briefcase, take the photo opportunity, and then start the walk to Parliament to be able to make the presentation that many Kenyans have been waiting for here today. Also, the conversation continuing around Parliament, lots of stakeholders giving us their reactions on just what to expect within this budget, and of course, bringing in various aspects of conversation regarding the math around it. What exactly are the numbers? Are they ambitious? Are they pessimistic? That, of course, being the conversation. We continue right here in studio with my panel as indicated earlier. And on this side of the break, we want to start off with the question, of course, the fact that while the budget is ambitious, they do have a hole to fill. This, of course, is supposed to be filled in using borrowing. I'll start off with Lydia this time. Domestic borrowing has been a challenge for government over the past 1 year, especially with the cap on interest rates. We've seen Treasury cancel at least 3 auctions, mainly because the sorts of offers they got weren't attractive. Do you think this will persist in the new year? Where is the middle ground, and what should government do to enable them be able to borrow in a way that doesn't squeeze out the private sector, but still enables them meet the objectives?
In terms of internal borrowing, it's interesting to see the latest trend that is happening. Looking back from when the interest rates were caps for banks.
Yes.
And when that was done, the move that was expected was that many people will be able to access borrowing. And what you'll see is that the credit growth has actually declined, because right now it's at 4%, and the time like now last year it was at 20%. And what banks are actually doing, they're the ones who are actually buying the treasury bonds instead of them being bought by the normal wananchi. And what you'll see is that also when the introduction of M-Akiba, which was geared towards the small individual with small revenue, it was it's actually being bought by other individuals with higher revenues, and therefore the target market is not being achieved. And whether the government will actually get enough revenue from internal borrowing, it's something we have to wait and see, because right now the CBK has actually commissioned a study to see what is the impact of reducing the interest rate capping. So will it actually help the normal Kenyans, or is it really affecting the market? Because what you'll see is that the financial institution have introduced stringent measures where the private sector are actually not accessing the loans because they're being viewed as risky by the financial institutions. Yeah. So
this seems to be a sort of a catch-22 for government, especially the fact that you have this hole which you need to fill somehow. You have this thing you put in place to be able to sort out Mwananchi. And then you have an economy that has been slowing down as a result, and you don't know whether this is blackmail, whether it's extortion by players, or whether indeed it is a real outcome of the things that you've put in place. Edward, where do you think this will end? What do you think should be the way forward, especially knowing that government can choose to amend some of these laws even through the budget?
Peter, is counterproductive for the government to cap interest rates at 14%. Then at the same time, the government wants to borrow from internal sources or to engage in domestic borrowing.
Yes.
So the only way forward is to look at an aspect where the interest rates should not be controlled. Because you see, the government will be competing with the private sector for the money. So definitely the lenders of money will give to the government. So the private sector or where they get the money for business growth. So that policy will end up slowing business growth. Look at the growth of the economy at 6%.
Yes.
But today as we talk, the rate of inflation is at 10.1. So they should actually commission a study so that the interest rates are not controlled.
Yes.
That's my recommendation.
Rajesh, coming over to you, the fact that carrot and stick, the stick doesn't seem to be working. What are the carrots we can throw these players through the budget or otherwise? First, to kickstart lending again to private sector, and then, of course, to sort of spur the economy once again, because SMEs are the engine of this economy. And if they start to slow down in a major way, then we will see really big impact that is spread throughout. So what are those measures that we can be looking out for in the coming budget statement?
Peter, I don't know whether you remember early 90s.
Yes.
We had exchange controls, we had import control and everything.
Yes.
And once we liberalized from there, we as a country really progressed well.
Yes.
And I think the same answer lies in there. I think at the end of the day, very much people thrive in a liberal environment.
But how do you reconcile the free market with the need to protect and indeed spur growth at some level for people who might not be market players?
I think so. I think therefore, one of the things has to be, a lender will always look at the risk profile of the person borrowing from them. So how do we actually give them comfort that when you're lending to SMEs and everything, it'll be okay. And you can see that in microfinance. While when people are borrowing at rates, the interest rate they pay are fairly high, but the default rate isn't there. So there is already experience at the microfinance level. And if you look at those institutions which have been set up to lend money, not really to SMEs, but even to the small traders, the answer lies in there. I think they just need to look at how they manage the risks. And the government needs to come out with enough regulation and environment to stimulate that type of lending.
Well, indeed, we want to turn our eyes to the Treasury buildings right now, where we can see that the Cabinet Secretary has indeed just stepped out onto the steps with that briefcase, which is holding it used to be secret, but he's holding this statement that he's going to table over the next 1 hour to maybe 45 minutes to bring Kenyans up to speed on just what the budget statement for the year 2017-2018 is. Of course, the conversation there being the fact that this has been a process that has brought together various stakeholders, enabled various inputs into this budget, enabled the creation of various priorities, and of course, then this being tabled at Parliament for the entire country to digest, then indeed go over the finance bill for, the next few weeks and be able to operationalize this into law one way or the other. That there, of course, being the briefcase that we have seen time and again come to us in Parliament and indeed from Treasury, and be able to tell us the secrets that are usually in government when it comes to how your money will be used over the next 1 year. What are the tax measures? What will be the various ways to raise revenues? What indeed can you expect will be there for you over the next 1 year? That has been a question we've been putting to a lot of people there today, and C.S. Henry Rotich just about there to start the walk to Parliament, and of course posing with his team on the steps of the Treasury building and taking a few minutes to simply do the photo opportunity, then shake a few hands and then walk off. What will be the perspective coming out of Parliament today? The question on very many people's minds today. He is, of course, now taking the picture there with his deputy, who, of course, is Dr. Kamau Thuge, and is now about to step into his official limousine for the drive that will take him to Parliament buildings. And of course, that battery of journalists very keen there to angle themselves for each and every crucial shot. Of course, the budget policy statement, the appropriations bill, and indeed the finance bill much later on has been a lot of teamwork. It is not just an individual's work, and the tabling of the budget statement being just one step in what has been a long process to bring us to this point, something that actually started in June last year, and something that, well, brought in a lot of expectations from people and perspectives from others. And just to field one question from you, just regarding this process. This was something that we inherited from the British, right?
No, well, the previous one we did, but this one is really something we have started when we come in the Public Finance Management Act.
Yes.
There is a whole annual cycle around that. I think earlier on you mentioned about it. Really, the process starts at the beginning of the financial year when the framework is set up on how ministries, state corporations should come out with estimates, particularly on the expenditure side. And then those are pulled together. There are public forums which happen around October. I'm talking about the normal year. This is obviously slightly unusual that we have brought forward at the actual reading of the budget statement to March from June. And then in January, February, he comes out his budget policy statement, which really sets out how the previous year has been, how is the outlook in terms of the current year, and how they look at the following year. So it's a 3-year cycle in how this is all looked at. The previous year, the current year, and the year they're actually making the budget statement for. And that the Parliament has to review and approve. And the next step then is actually, as like you said, the appropriation bill.